So now here I am again with Dr. Amitay, and today we'll be discussing mental health under the current situation with quarantine, with people out of work, people having to spend time either in isolation or a lot more time at home with family members. Also for some people where this has brought up conspiracy theories or rabbit holes, how to deal with concerns about that are the type of things I'd like to touch on with you. And we could start anywhere you want.
Okay. I think that the first thing is for different people, the situation is going to be incredibly different. I know a number of people who've lost their jobs, a number of people who don't know if they're going to have a job to come back to. Yes, we can only talk about Canada and the US. We can't talk about any other country unless you know, so I'm just going to be restricting it to these areas. And, and I saw in the news in the States that, what was it? I forget this. There were a few shots of people lining up for hours to get food at food banks or makeshift food banks. And this is because they've run out of food, and not just because the shelves are empty, but because they don't have the money. They were living so precariously, and it's going to take a while till the budget, I guess, till people are getting those checks and everything like that. And even then it's a temporary solution. So there's a lot. All of this is to say that some people are doing okay. I am very blessed. I'm very thankful that there have been some changes, some disruptions to my work. It's all online, but I still have a job, whether it's teaching at the university or whether it's seeing patients. And not everyone's comfortable with this kind of methodology. So I will lose a few patients, and I'll probably lose a few courses. Not all the courses will be transitioned onto the online learning. So I will have a few blows to my income, but it's nothing compared to what other people are going through. So I wanted to put that out there first and foremost, that a lot of the anxiety people are experiencing is real, right? It's not just about being isolated. It's how the hell am I going to keep this roof over my head? Or what's the world going to look like when I go outside? Do I have a job? And so on. So students who are graduating and hoping to get in the workforce, well, that's not going to happen. So yes, and different areas are dealing with it differently. So anyway, that's the first thing I think we have to acknowledge, that some people are in a better state than others. And I hope that the people who are recognize that, for themselves, are so grateful. I mean, I say this every day. I always try to practice gratitude. It sounds like a cliche, but the science is in. We know that if you're able to find genuine gratitude and not grateful to other people for their sake, I always tell my patients, gratitude is self-serving, because if you put yourself in that state, it buffers or blocks any negativity, fear, anger, resentment, hurt. It doesn't penetrate. Now, it's only temporary. It might be only a few seconds, could be a few minutes, but still, instead of spiraling downward, if you can find something to hold on, I always tell my patients that this might not make you feel better, but it can prevent you from spiraling down even further or going more into anxiety or fear or something like that. So I hope that people will try their best to find little anchors where they go, okay, as bad as it is, what can I find to be grateful for? That will help me. So that's one thing that people have to do.
And being bipolar, I can say that's something that learning to do that's helped me extremely. So even if I'm like really suicidally depressed, where it's like something you have to push back against to stop yourself from acting on, I will focus on, okay, well, if I have to be suicidally depressed, I'm so grateful that I'm on disability. I've got a house all to myself to be depressed in. I don't have to worry about a job or even worrying what other people think. I've got electricity. If it's winter, my house is warm. Even when you're suicidally depressed, because just think, what would it be like if you were just as suicidally depressed and the power was out, no running water, and you were homeless? And as silly as it sounds, focusing on those things makes a really big difference. And and I've also noticed with this situation, I'm oddly lucky that I was already on disability and a total shut-in. So the current situation hasn't affected me at all. I get all my supplies, like groceries, dropped off. I don't go anywhere. The only change to me has been a few things I couldn't order to get dropped off because grocery stores were running low, but that's nothing. So it hasn't really actually, the way this has affected me the most is I put up a vid because I'd been very inactive over the winter. For a few months, I only did one video a month. And then when this happened, I put out a video asking if anyone needed help. And I just asked if people wanted content because I didn't know if there was going to be a huge flood of content and that there was no point. But I got feedback that people said, hey, if you're feeling up to doing more, we would like it. And so because of the quarantine, I've sort of thought that if I'm in a unique position where I'm unaffected and I have great skills for lots of time in isolation, now's the time I should push myself really hard. So I've been putting out a lot more videos, doing more private talks with audience members, and I've started hosting some watch parties and conversations that have been going well. So for me, it's the reverse. Many people have lost their job, and even though the channel doesn't make money for me or anything, I still think of it as my job. It's just kind of my spiritual job. I'm all spiritual about it. So for me, it's been a big increase in my workload instead. And yeah, I'm fortunate that I had already learned how to live off of disability. Disability is not affected by this. So, so I really don't know what other people who are dealing with financial difficulties are going through.
Right. Well, yeah, it's some people, it really shows perspective. I mean, I always tell people that my therapy boils down to two major things, sort of three, but two of them are related. One is perspective, right? And the perspective you just described, because if someone knew your situation exactly and they didn't have the same perspective you had, or if they were in your situation, they would be further depressed or immobile or angry at the world. And maybe you've gone through those periods. I mean, you've talked about suicidal depression, or depressive suicide, but you found a way to see it, to look at it in a way that changes the brain chemistry. And that is under our control. And this is what I'm saying. I said this when we first started getting locked up and I had a few interviews, I was saying that there's so much that is not within our control. Okay. And when I say there's two things in my therapy, one is perspective and the other is control. All right. And part of control is containment. And containment, it can be containing your thoughts, containing your feelings, containing, you know, your actions. But those to me really are the crux of any good therapy, to gain a healthier perspective, not lie to yourself, not just try to make yourself feel good, but a realistic, adaptive perspective, and then being able to control what you can control. And so with the 99.99999% of the world out of your control, that 9 can keep going. We focus on that tiny little part that we can. And even in the case like this with COVID, you found ways to, you know, not just feel helpless. And, you know, maybe it's because you say that you've adapted to this lifestyle, but, you know, regardless, you could have turned it around and made it even worse. You could have said, oh my God, on top of everything else, and this is happening, or, you know, and now that's going to prevent me from going out to the world and doing what I was going to try to do. Like, there's so many ways you could have made it negative. So you made it positive, more than just positive, you made it productive. And you discovered, not necessarily now, probably years ago, but you discovered what the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous discovered. And by the way, if anyone goes, oh, AA, and rolls their eyes, I'm a big fan of whatever works. And so I know AA doesn't work for a lot of people. And I used to poo-poo it for years because I only knew the people I knew who had gone through AA, they didn't get it. So I would just see them parroting lines, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm taking care of my side of the street one day at a time. And they were just talking like a robot. And then I met a few people who actually understood the concept and who had learned, you know, had read the big book and learned to be a good, strong person. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, there's a lot out of this. And you don't have to be religious. It helps for people, but there's other ways to find your higher power and so on. So, you know, so the point is, if anyone's going to roll their eyes when they hear AA, that means you don't know the good that's there, right? Because I can take any therapy, any standard psychotherapy, and I've taught many of them. I use 8 orientations myself, and I know there's a lot of good in all of them, and there's a lot of problems with them. Same with AA. So the founders of AA, what they learned was that they got healthier when they helped others. And that's what you must have discovered at some point in your past. And I hope that people who are locked up or whatever else, that they realize that if they endeavor to try to help somebody else, someone who deserves it. You should never feel obliged to help. That you want to help somebody, you feel they deserve it, you're going to benefit from that spiritually, physically, mentally.
And someone who wants the help, because some social justice warriors are trying to help. Don't offer anyone help they're not looking for. So if someone's an alcoholic and they don't want to stop, don't help them with their drinking. They're just going to take it as negative. Look for the people that want the kind of help you have to offer. Or if you're a Christian and you find Christ helps, don't go bothering people who don't want to hear about Christ. Find the people who are looking for help and who want to hear about whatever it is you have to offer. I find that's just a huge thing. Is, yeah, if you want to help people, look for people who want the kind of help you have to offer, but also don't force yourself to help people in ways that aren't your natural ability. Like what I do of trying to talk people through suicidal times. Not everyone has that skill set. So if you know someone's suicidal and you're dragged down by that, you feel you make it worse. No, of course, don't try to talk them through it. Help them whatever other ways you can. Yeah, to look within for what's really your natural ability to do and to direct that at the people who actually want it and are worth it.
Right, exactly. And, you know, and I'll say it, I said it once, I'm going to say it again. I'm a realist. And so I know, for example, let's say Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. Tolle, the power of
I say
now.
Tolle. Yeah,
Tolle?
I'm familiar with his stuff.
Right. So one time, it's funny, things always happen in threes with me. And there's this whole spiritual thing about it. But I had 3 patients once. I had other patients as well. But like within 1 week, 3 different patients years ago all mentioned Eckhart Tolle. 3 independent patients. I was like, wow. And I hadn't heard about him at the time. I looked into him and I realized that he was making my patients crazy and he was hurting them, not him directly, but because they were taking his message the wrong way. And it's partly his fault because as a realist, okay, again, I'm a realist. So not everyone's going to agree, and that's fine. Okay. But let's say, for example, because when you're talking about helping people who want it or who you have the ability to help and who deserve it, well, there are many people who I call it neurotic guilt, where they feel guilty. Guilt is a good thing. We need guilt. Otherwise, we'd be savages. We need the guilt to keep us on track, not to hurt others, not to do things that can be, you know, harmful to basically to other people, do bad things. Neurotic guilt is when either you feel too much guilt for something or you feel guilt for something you shouldn't feel guilty for. Okay. So many people are plagued by neurotic guilt. And so I try to help them see the difference between guilt and neurotic guilt. And one of the things that people often feel neurotically guilty for, and shame on anyone who makes them feel this way, is, for example, let's say somebody did something terrible to you, and you know, and that person doesn't acknowledge it. They don't care. They just did it with malicious intent, and they couldn't be bothered to see how you're doing. And people are being told, well, you should try to see it from their perspective. Maybe they're just hurting. Maybe, like, it's a really nice sentiment. And if the whole world was like that, where we could always take the other person's perspective, no matter how much hurt they've done to us or how much, what bad condition we're in or whatever else, if we could all do that, great. But the reality is almost nobody can do that, at least not consistently, right? To that level.
I'll just throw out phenomenologically, I found that is helpful to me. Now, it doesn't mean that when you forgive someone, you allow them to continue abusing you. That's different. But I've actually found great success with doing exactly what you said, like, was difficult. Especially if someone's hurting me and they're actually doing something wrong, where, you know, everyone else agrees. And if I can put myself in perspective, their perspective, see how unenlightened and hurt they are, it helps me forgive them. And then it doesn't mean I have to allow them to keep hurting me, but it also means I don't have to carry around any negative emotion. And it makes it very easy for me not to overreact, like to really hold my line, not to get upset and then use their wrongdoings as an excuse to do wrong myself. So I'll just throw it out there that for me, I actually find that very, very helpful. But I'm a weird case because the way I've gotten this way, at one point I spent 2 years in basic isolation, no phone, no internet, didn't see anyone except supplies. And since then, like, I'm one of those cases where medications never helped. my condition. So I've taken a very bizarre meditative, spiritual, and magical path. So I'm not discrediting your point of view, because I'm so strange that absolutely there's lots that works for me that it would take 1 in a million people for it to work for. But I will just throw out there, I'm the exception to what you were saying. I found it extremely rewarding to do that kind of spiritual meditation when people harm me.
Right. And again, I say to people, I say to my patients, I go, there are a few people who can do that. Tiny number. Even the best Buddhists, among the best Buddhists, only a few of them can truly lose ego completely. Now, what you're describing is not necessarily losing one's ego, but it would be consistent with that. And so I say that only a tiny proportion of people could actually lose their ego and have zero ego. But again, the average person can't do that. So I tell them, and by the way, what you said about you said a couple of very important things, which is, I tell them, if you want to forgive somebody, I say, I'll help you learn to forgive them, but I'm not going to tell you that you should forgive them. See, that's the problem that they were being told. And, can you imagine, like, I had one patient whose father sexually assaulted her, and her mother, well, it's not one, I've had many patients like that. Now, what I'm about to say, I can say this because it's so common. I'm not identifying any one patient. Unfortunately, there's many. And, so her father had sexually assaulted her for years. Her mother knew, her mother covered up and everything like that. And people were telling her, you should forgive them. It's like, no, that's evil. And when she told me that, and she said that, I want to kill my parents. And I said to her, I understand why. And that shocked her. I didn't tell her, go ahead, I'll give you an alibi, right? I just said, I understand why you would feel that way. And she said, you're the first person in all my years of therapists and lawyers and police, whoever, who validated me in that feeling, right? And so that's really powerful, because everyone else said, no, you shouldn't, you should forgive. And why forgive? So anyway, she wasn't in that state. So I always tell people, if you can get to that state that's enlightened, yeah, sure, that would be great, but most people can't get there. So I say, you should only forgive either A, if the person has shown acknowledgement, etc., or B, you feel that it will actually be beneficial to you. And that's where you found that. Okay. And I say, because I agreed, I tell them, I say, if you're holding on to anger or whatever, that I say you have to acknowledge it. It has to be validated. But if you do that, eventually you can maybe let go of it. And you can even let go not forgiving. You can let go by deciding. If you say that by forgiving them, that's going to help me let go, great. If that's what it's going to be, wonderful. But it has to be on your terms. And that's what I'm saying, that a lot of people don't feel it's on their terms. They're pushed into it by other people who have ideals that are not possible to live up to or measure up to. So,
and I'm also not claiming that all I have inside me are enlightened emotions. When someone hurts me, I have like a sub-personality that's homicidal. Thoughts flash through my mind of killing people. When I'm suicidal, sometimes I have to allow my suicidal sub-personality to live it out. Like, I'll imagine doing it to get it out of my system. So right. I have as horrible thoughts as the worst people. Like, I have strong visualizations of hurting people, and there is a part of me deep inside that likes that. I'm not claiming I don't have that. I'm just claiming that when that arises, I observe it mindfully. I don't allow it to take control, and I take steps to allow it to express itself, to validate the emotion, to learn from it, then to process, forgive, step back into a more enlightened state. And the more often you do it for people, so if you're one of those rare people watching this who could actually achieve this and you're just getting going, it's harder at first. If you can just achieve the more enlightened state every now and then, don't get discouraged. The longer, and I've been doing it for so long now that I've really tipped over to where I'm in the enlightened state the majority of the time. Also with mindfulness, I am almost always mindful of my state. I'm almost always mindful of my thoughts and picking and choosing which to go with. But that took years and years and years and years of working on.
Right. And people come to me usually not in that, they're not on that trajectory. They're at the bottom. And so that's why, to try to push them into that position, into that state where they should be doing things that they're not capable of doing, that's invalidating. So, and again, Eckhart Tolle, he's trying to get people up to there. And I say to everyone, I say, aim for that. But if you can get this high, you're doing amazing, right? That's what I try to tell my patients. I say, because that's where I was saying they were driving themselves crazy. They were expecting to be at this enlightened state where it's like, you've only been reading the book, you're in chapter 3. Like, how can you think that? Have more self-compassion and be more realistic. And as long as you're on that path toward improvement, that's great. I always tell people, it's not like you're saying, be happy with yourself and stay there, right? Be happy with yourself where you are and say, my plan is to keep going better. And to tie this back to the whole COVID question, okay, because you mentioned mindfulness a number of times. So I always tell everybody, I say, I'm not a fan for myself of mindfulness, meditation, or yoga, okay? I say, if they teach these at schools, because more and more schools are trying to teach these types of things, I say, I hope they do from a young age. If they teach kids from a young age to be able to better regulate themselves, to be able to step back, not get caught up in the moment only, but to do what you were saying earlier, even as a young child, kids can learn kind of the basic steps to not be a slave to their emotions. Well, they're kids, so they're going to be in most cases, but they can still later on think about it, reflect, and so on. So I'm a huge fan of that for most people, but I recognize that not everybody can get into that. I just can't. I've got a sauna, which I do almost every day. I can't sit in that sauna for 40 minutes alone. I put my computer outside my glass door and I watch it. I don't want to sit there for 40 minutes doing nothing. I want to do something. So I'm watching movies or whatever, or the internet. So that's just not for me personally. But I always tell everybody else, if you can do it, all the power to you. But I do say the one thing that I do, and I want to say, we're going to talk about this now. When you say, what can people do? I say everything. It's a joke. It's a running joke with my patients, because every time I ask them a question, I say there's a pretty good chance the answer is going to be this. And the question is like how to cope with a certain thing. How do I not react in this moment? How do I not let someone get my goat? How do I not blow this interview? Et cetera, et cetera. The answer always starts with the first thing. What do mindfulness, meditation, and yoga all have in common? What's the most important element of them?
Well, it depends, because I find there's such a variety of meditation.
Right, but they all have one thing in common. They all do. And when I give you the answer, you go, of course.
Yeah, no, sorry, my brain's locking up with too many directions to go with that.
Right. So the answer is breathing.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I tell people that. So I'm not a fan of all this other stuff just because that's just not the way my mind operates. But I learned how to breathe many years ago when I was working in a hospital and I was dealing with patients with anxiety. And so I learned how to do proper breathing. It was a game changer with me. I had heart surgery 2 years ago, almost, I guess, 2 years, a couple months ago, open heart surgery. I was relatively young, had a deficient heart valve, congenital, didn't know about it. I was dying. Okay. Like, I was really, really bad. Didn't know how bad it was. And so I had all this test, and a year and a half before that, I had my kidney taken out because there was a giant tumor on it that had been growing, like this huge tumor. So for the last few years, I've been in and out of hospitals many times, lots of testing, all this stuff, okay? And the nurses always think I'm an athlete because my heart rate is always like bang on. We're talking like 40, like my resting heart rate's about 40 beats per second. And they're like, that's a triathlete's heart rate. I was like, well, I'm not a triathlete. It's all breathing. And I tell it to my patients. I say, this is how I sell breathing. I say that personal story, that by using breathing, I was able, and I still am able, to keep my heart at a really good, healthy limit. My blood pressure as well, number one. And people have to understand, when I talk, like as I'm talking now, and I'm animated, I'm at like 10% capacity. I've learned to slow things down. I'm normally really, really fast. But in therapy, when I teach and so on, I've learned to really slow things down. So I'm not some relaxed, hippy dippy, slow, calm person. My neurology, it's neurotic as hell, right? My dad's got bipolar disorder, so I come by naturally like to have high intensity brain power. My early environment was chaotic, and I was a really angry person. I was always angry, and thank goodness that in my 20s, I think it was my 20s, yeah, it was in my 20s when I learned that type A personality, that they die prematurely because of coronary heart disease, because of the aggression and the anger, hostility. It's not being active and rushing around. It's the hostility that kills you. So many years ago, I realized I don't want to die prematurely. My grandfather on my dad's side died of a heart attack when he was like 60 something. My father had a heart attack when he was 60, before he was in his 50s. Had to have triple bypass surgery or quadruple bypass. So, and this is before I knew about my congenital heart defect. So thank goodness I made that decision. So I tell my patients this. I say, I'm not naturally like this. Because I ask my patients, what do you think of me? They say, you're calm, you're relaxed. I go, yeah, that's not me. I learned to be that way. So if I can do it, right? I'm not type A, I'm type A plus. So
what is the breathing technique you use?
Okay, so here's the breathing, and there's different types. Okay, so everyone can do different things, and there's the Wim Hof method, which I haven't done. It's just that's a crazy, crazy method. So mine it's diaphragmatic breathing. But here's the thing: I've watched people on videos, I've seen books, and they give people the wrong advice. So here's the thing: so when people take deep breaths, right, they always fill their chest and lungs in. They go, all right. And I learned from a young when I was doing this work that that's the wrong way to do it. If you can learn to master, so I always tell my patients, I go, look at my chest and shoulders. I'm going to take a really deep breath. Watch what happens.
So are you breathing entirely into the stomach?
Exactly. 100%. And a lot of these people who teach it, they go, put your hand on your chest, put your hand on your diaphragm. I'm not going to angle the camera, okay, but, and right. And they say, or put your hand on your belly. And they say, as long as your belly's moving more than your chest. I say, no, forget that. Your chest and shoulders don't have to move at all. If you breathe purely into your diaphragm, you are relaxing your body. You feel your shoulders just go relaxed, and there's like a homeostasis internally. Your carbon dioxide oxygen balance is perfect, basically, if you breathe into the diaphragm. So I tell people that, and what I say is, here's a trick. Everyone can do it. I've never met someone who couldn't learn to do it. But I say it's tricky because think about it. When you're anxious and you need to slow yourself down, I say your sympathetic nervous system is on fire. Your cave person DNA is saying danger, danger, run or fight. Your DNA isn't telling you a giant tiger's coming at me. I'm going to kick back and relax. Okay? Our brain is saying, get activated, get activated. So you're doing the opposite of what your body wants to do, but it's the right thing. So I tell people, normally when you breathe in, right, your chest goes out, but your stomach goes in. I'm saying you're doing the opposite. When you breathe in, your diaphragm expands. Your stomach, forget the diaphragm, you say your belly goes out. So I teach patients, I go, just practice sucking in your gut, in and out, just so you can isolate it. And then push your stomach out and try to fill it in with air. So I tell people, this is the cornerstone of all therapy that I do, not just for anxious people. And because, again, you kept saying mindfulness, which is so important because everybody knows, or everybody, I'm being hyperbolic, cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. Jordan Peterson talks about it all the time. And it can be very, very helpful. It's one of my 8 orientations. And years ago, up until I learned about acceptance therapy, if someone said to me, of all the therapies you do, which one would you use for yourself? It would have been CBT. I'm the kind of person, if you tell me, hey, stupid, this is what you're doing wrong, fix it. I go, oh, geez, yeah, you're right. And I fix it. I wouldn't say, how dare you call me stupid? I'd go, thank you. Now I get it. Most people don't operate that way. And CBT itself is fine. But a lot of practitioners, what they didn't realize was, for example, let's say you're afraid of elevators, and you're CBT, you're supposed to approach an elevator 3 times a day, get on it, do whatever. Okay, 3 times a day. If you do it 3 times a day, after a few weeks or so on, you should be in a pretty good state. And most patients, though, aren't going to do it because they're terrified. Right? And they get all tense. They're approaching the elevator. They're feeling all terrible. And then when they back out at the last second, oh, that feels so good, right? So they're being rewarded for not doing it. They're being rewarded for approaching and then taking off and feeling, So when I do CBT, I tell my patients, I go, I know you're not going to, there's a very good chance you're not going to do it. I get it. I understand why, because I'm asking you to confront the thing that scares you the most. When you are able to do it, you will get better. But if you're not ready to do it yet, get yourself as close as you can, make improvements. Don't beat yourself up for it. You're just not ready. And I encourage them to be ready. Whereas CBT is like, okay, we're on day 4. You should be here right now. If you're not here, you're not doing hard enough. And I know there's some people who will watch you go, that's not CBT. guess what? I've spoken to more people than most, right? I've spoken to tens of thousands of people, not just patients, but students. And so many people said that. That was exactly their therapist, their CBT therapist, right? I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself. They make them feel bad for not doing these things. So what CBT finally realized a few years ago, there's a new type of CBT. It's called Mindfulness Based Cbt, MCBT, because they realized if I'm having a panic attack and if I say to myself, well, the odds of me dying are blah, 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 or this is really just my body reacting, well, I'm not thinking that way in the midst of my mind going haywire. I can't implement these tools until I've brought myself down. So that's the first thing I teach patients with panic disorder or panic attacks. I say, let's just learn to help you ride it out. You're not going to use some special intervention. It's just, I'm going to keep my shit together. I'm not going to, go crazy. I'm just going to grin and bear it for the first time. And then the next time, and eventually, and again, so I tell them, eventually you'll be able to implement the breathing. I say, do the breathing as much as you can during the day when you're feeling calm, not just when you're feeling anxious, because when you're feeling anxious, breathing's not the first thing you're normally going to think about. But if you do it as often as you can, it'll be more natural when the time comes, right? So I say, breathing is a cornerstone of everything. So if people are trapped inside and now they're worrying about stuff that they have no control over, they have no idea, we don't know what's going to happen next month or next week or 6 months from now. We don't know. And people are already spiraling and projecting into the future. It's like, no. And again, all this stuff because if you've been doing mindfulness, ground myself in the present. Okay. And there's techniques to do it. There's a whole bunch of mindfulness techniques. I just do the breathing, and the breathing is enough for me personally. And people should know, ideally is breathe through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth. But I tell people, if it's in through the nose, out through the nose, in through the mouth, out, I don't care. As long as you're slowly, deeply, and rhythmically breathing. Ideally, you can hold it once you do that, like when you breathe in, hold for a couple of seconds and then breathe out. But if that's too much, then just in, out, smoothly, rhythmically. When you're going to bed, I tell people, when you go to bed, trying to do some complex breathing is counterproductive because now you're thinking too much. If you just do simple rhythmic belly breathing while you're trying to go to sleep, it'll help contain your thoughts. Just focus on the breathing. I sometimes put my hand in front of my nose so I feel the wind on my hand. That's grounding me too. Sometimes it's the sound. Sometimes it's visualizing air coming in and out. Whatever it is, it keeps me present. And that's one of the most important things people can do while they're locked up so they don't lose their mind, so to speak. Stay grounded. And even if you don't want to do all the mindfulness and yoga and meditation, breathing is a huge part of it.
For me, the biggest part of mindfulness is accessing that awareness that is beyond thoughts and emotions. And so I see now how the old me, I really thought I was my thoughts and emotions. Like I thought that was me. I'm now aware of the larger self, and to pay attention to my emotional, energetic states and my mental activity. So nothing rolls through the back of my mind without me being aware of it. I realize it used to. One thought's going in the back, or even my main thought. It used to be possible in the past that I could be focused on something that's just building my anger, and I'm so caught up in it that I don't even know, the way you can tell someone to please stop being angry and they will jump and scream that they're not angry. For me, the mindfulness is to be aware of everything going on, to be aware I'm not my thoughts. So if an image of me beating someone to death pops in my head when they're being abusive, like that's not me. That's a thought that arose. And for me, especially being bipolar, to be very aware of my emotional state. Because if you're depressed and you sort of don't notice you've gotten depressed, then you act as though the world had changed. People you were totally happy with yesterday, suddenly they're all assholes. And the project you loved is suddenly stupid. And if you're not mindful, you really suddenly are in a world where all your friends are assholes and your project is stupid. Whereas I notice I begin to get depressed, and I paid attention to what my mind does when it's depressed. So if suddenly the thought occurs, hey, my friend's an asshole, no, you're depressed, and you filter things that way. And so it's to watch the state I'm in so that I can be correcting it from as early as possible, or that if I get into a really extreme state, that I'm aware I'm in an extreme state, that I lock down on focusing on just that I don't allow myself to act out because of it. That to me is the main part of mindfulness, is to be aware of all your thoughts and emotions and that aware of your larger internal self.
Well, and also the other thing that you said, which is a huge part of that, okay, is that you say also that not only being aware of it, but you're able to basically step outside of it, observe it, and realize that's not me. It's a thought or a feeling versus you're caught up in it, right? That's the healthy thing. And again, people can't do that if they're all riled up. You may have learned to do it, like you're able to do it maybe automatically, but most people, when they're riled up, they can't do that. They need that. That's why I say the breathing is the first step, and just calm myself. Now I can activate that. And if anyone says, here's a problem, okay, this is all under the field of what we call positive psychology. Mindfulness came from positive psychology. Martin Seligman, I want to say the late 90s, I could be a bit off on the years, but probably around the late 90s, started the field of positive psychology, and mindfulness started coming up. Somebody I did my undergrad thesis with, he was, I'm pretty sure, one of the first psychologists to bring mindfulness from the East to Canada, and did it with CBT for depression. So a lot of people, though, they think, oh, this is just so hippy dippy, and why should I do this? And I tell them, if you could actually, if you did all this with your head in an fMRI or any other type of brain scan, if it was precise enough, you would see that when you're doing this, it's not just some esoteric exercise. It is changing what's happening in your brain, right? And if you're mindful of it, you will actually feel the difference. But if you could take a brain scan and go, oh, this is my brain on anger, and here's my brain calm. It's a huge difference. They're lighting up differently. And we know this now. And the people who were promoting this type of stuff years before, whether it was like Buddhists or any, they didn't have the technology, but somehow they knew that this is the right way to feel better. And it's not, and I'm not a fan of feeling good. I'm a fan of not feeling like unnecessarily bad. If you should feel bad, good. That's what it's supposed to happen. But again, the neurotic guilt or anger or whatever else that's disproportionate to the issue or is hurting you. That's what we're trying to remedy. So yeah, and again, breathing, I say, is first step.
For anyone dealing with the neurotic guilt or depression, because depression's the same thing. There's a place for sadness. There's a place for grief. Depression is when that's turned on for nothing. And so that idea of needless suffering is horrible. So one way I've found to deal with that is to find uses for the state. So you could say my depression isn't functional in that it's not correlated to things in the world. Instead, for me, my depression is functional because I'm essentially working as a sort of healer type thing. And my depression is very helpful in teaching me how to help others with depression. So I've been able to reframe it all so that all of my suffering has purpose now. So if you are a person that's stuck with purposeless suffering, you'd be amazed what you can learn from it. Because also, when I talk about mindfulness, I didn't study mindfulness. It was time alone, learning how to deal with myself. And then when I came across the term mindfulness, I was like, oh, okay, that's the word for what I've learned to do on my own. But really, my teacher has been my own suffering, and conversations in delusional states with angels is really where the basis of all of my practice comes from. But then after developing my own practice and learning more, I found it all through various psychological, spiritual, and magical traditions.
Right. And it's funny because with all the different training that I've done and different orientations, I tell people, I didn't learn this, most of the stuff I didn't learn and go, oh, this is something new, I'm going to use it. It's like, this is something I've been doing, but there's a systematic way of doing it, or there's a name for it or something like that. So you came across it the same way. There's something you said about the mindfulness. Darn it, this happened. I should be taking notes. Sorry. Oh yes, perspective. When I said earlier about perspective and containment or control, you did exactly that. You took a healthy perspective on an unhealthy state of mind, and you made it healthy. You learned to deal with it. And here's the thing. This whole mindfulness, the kind of cognitive correlate of that, the more cognitive part is the acceptance. Okay, so acceptance therapy. And if anyone wants a good self-help book, I've been promoting this to everybody. Act Made Simple. All right. There's a second version that came out in 2019. The first version, it was messy. It could have been edited much better, but I really liked it that there were certain things that spoke to me. ACT made simple. And then 2019, they came out with a new version. And Russ Harris is the author. I recommend people to that. There's different types of acceptance therapy. They're all the same principle, slightly different techniques, whatever. So ACT Made Simple, interestingly, it's a book for psychologists to work with patients, but patients can use it as a self-help book and see, what they need to do. It's written in pretty plain language. So I recommend everybody to take a look at it. I think it's very valuable, but people hear acceptance and they misunderstand what it means. Acceptance is not resigning yourself to your fate. Acceptance is accepting reality and not lying to yourself, not pretending things are or hoping for things that aren't going to happen. It's, what is my reality? So you've accepted, yeah, I've got depression, I've got bipolar disorder, I've got suicidal thoughts. You're not denying it, you're accepting it. And a big part of acceptance is the C, it's ACT, acceptance and commitment. And the commitment is commitment to change or to improvement. So so you've learned that. You say, okay, great. So I'm depressed. You said, what am I going to do with it? And you've learned an adaptive way to deal with it, right? And by helping others. So what I say to people is, if you can learn to accept reality, so you're not lying to yourself or hoping for things that aren't going to happen, that's important. And then the second thing is, it's a fine line to walk. And I always tell patients, I do not ever accept or promote rationalization. Now, people hear rationalize, they think to make rational arguments, but no, rationalization is a defense mechanism, which is to make excuses for things. So if someone buys if someone buys a new house and it's 3 hours out of town, and they were living downtown before, but they wanted more space and so they buy a house and now they're commuting 3 hours each way. And they're going, oh yeah, I love the drive, and I love spending $100 on gas, and and I love talk radio. That's what I'm doing. Well, they're lying to themselves and they're rationalizing versus someone saying, I made a big mistake. Whoops. Okay, what can I do about it? If I can change it, then I'll do everything in my power to change it. If I can't, then I have to come to terms with this, truly accept it, because that lying to ourselves, when you talk about the chat, those thoughts in the background or whatever, people have those all the time. And it's just ways to help them sleep better at night. Just, lying to themselves, not realizing what reality is. And so they're never changing it. They're just lying more. So, I'm a big proponent of again, having a healthy perspective, not lying to yourself and not rationalizing, but seeing what you're able to do with the reality in front of you. And because I'm assuming, I could be wrong, if you are able to help people and live a life and do everything that you're doing now that makes you feel productive and whole, if you were able to do that all without crippling depression and everything, would you choose it? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I'm ready to let go of this. And the way I think of it is, maybe one day I'll finally have learned everything I can learn from this depression and I'll have earned getting rid of it. But for now, it doesn't seem realistic to expect it. So I build, and for me, my cycle lines up with the calendar year. So I'm depressed in the winter, I go up in the spring, manic for the summer, die in the fall, spend the winter in the crypt. And like my partner Ryan on this channel, he's comfortable with that. Like, I'm on disability to begin with, but even my involvement with the channel, I build it around realistically what my cycle is. But I'm not holding on to any of this. I'm ready to let go of it if I can. So far, I can't let go of it, but I can experience it in better and better ways. I've learned, like, I can be present with deep depression, expand my internal space large enough that then I can also be, it's like I've got this big area of happiness. Like, I can spend quality time with my kids where I'm feeling love and joy, but at the same time, I feel the depression. I physically, I have it. It's like I can have an ache on one side of my heart from the depression and a glow on the other side now. And that wasn't by shrinking the depression. It was by making the internal space larger. And the one thing you said about honesty, maybe I didn't say this before, so anyone who's listened to me before will already know this, but just in case there's someone new listening to this, one of the very first things for me that I learned And I learned it in psychosis. Like God was telling me how important honesty was. And that's one thing that I took to heart. It's the first lesson I learned in psychosis. And I can't say enough how important being honest is. And it's a practice and it's a development. I like the way Peterson says, tell the truth or at least don't lie. But with honesty, I mean with yourself, with others, just always, always, always tell the truth to the best of your ability, and your ability to understand the truth will grow. And you can't do real mindfulness if you're not an honest person, because you won't be able to be mindfully present with parts of yourself that you're in denial of. So dishonesty will just put up so many difficulties in therapy, spiritual practices, meditation, and everything, that even if you weren't religious in any other way, to take like a sacred vow of honesty I can't say enough how important it is.
Right. And because I'm extremely pragmatic, right? I tell people, I say this to my students, to everybody. I say, you said it earlier, the most important honesty is to yourself, right? And I say to people, I can't, because again, I'm being realistic. It'd be nice if we could all be honest all the time with everybody, but we can't, whether it's self-serving or whether we're not trying to hurt somebody else. So, again, I'm being realistic and practical. So I say to people, if you have to lie to somebody, right? Or if you choose to lie to somebody, I say you have to make damn sure that you know that you're lying, you know why you're doing it, and you don't pretend that it's something that it's not, right? So at least, again, it's being honest with the experience, even if you're being dishonest with that other person, because it might not be to your benefit to be completely honest with that person. If my boss asks me for an idea and I know that they're going to fire me if I give them, if I disagree, for example, and I know that my lie is not going to hurt anybody, it's not like, oh, can we cut corners on this building that might collapse? It's not something like that, right? But if it's something minor where, just going along with the person or something like that, right? As long as I know what I am doing and why I'm doing it, all right? And again, ideally, we can elevate beyond that, but if we're not there, then it's okay to, do what we have to do. And again, and just so people don't misconstrue it, I'm not saying being entirely self-serving, but I am saying being pragmatic. And I put pragmatism over principles because someone who has all principles with no pragmatism is going to not last very long. You have to, know your audience, know your circumstance, know the reality.
Now, I would lean towards like what Sam Harris says, where I still would think ideally you would always be honest. Now, honesty doesn't also mean you say everything. It doesn't. It's like, for instance, perhaps to find a way to say something non-committal because you don't want to voice your, there's one: privacy, time and place, also careful wording. Honesty doesn't mean that, if your friend performed and it's horrible, can you find anything nice to say? Like, you looked great in that lighting, or
right,
I enjoyed being there because I love supporting you. Now, again, then to me, it's like, that's not the kind of full honesty, like full disclosure, but still, you haven't told a lie.
Right.
And I still think always it's best to avoid the lie. But I agree with you on, and again, there's practical situations certainly that other people encounter I don't have to worry about. Like, I'm not involved with professionals and, businesses and all of that. So I have more freedom to stick to my principles because I'm just a lunatic hermit anyway.
Right. Well, yeah, and again, it's same with AA, for example, right? Where a lot of my patients who go to AA, they drive themselves crazy because they're trying to live up to the ideals perfectly, and I say it doesn't always work. And even the founders of AA, if they're honest, they would they would admit they weren't perfect either. These are good ideals to ascribe to, but we can't.
And especially when you're first learning honesty, definitely all of that. Allow yourself the harmless lies because it takes time to adjust. But yeah, the eventual goal, you'd be amazed where you can get with something in 10 years when you just, every year, it's like, I'm going to try to do 1% better over this week, 1% better over the next. And just taking gradual steps, working on any of these practices where you don't push yourself too hard, because then you're going to get frustrated, you're going to give up.
Right.
Just take it small. A 1% improvement in your life is better than nothing. And if that's all you're willing to do right now, do that and reward yourself for it. Don't do it and feel guilty you only did 1%.
Right. And it's funny, when Andrew, when he had me on probably the second time, I think it was the second time, maybe the first or second time, and he was talking about, I forget exactly what it was, but a few times he was getting down on himself during the interview. And basically what I was telling him, and I knew he already knew this, but he needed a reminder that he was being too hard on himself. Like, he is progressing. You have to always expect either plateau for a while, or, you have those drop-offs and stuff, and you pick yourself back up again. And I just had to verbally remind him, like, it's okay to not be perfect at all times, right? We're humans. And that's what you're saying about, whether it's 1% or 5%, or you've regressed a little bit, as long as you're always trying to move forward. And that's the key thing. And I'm going to say, if I can throw this out to you, because again, I'm thinking of the kind of the framing of what do people do while they're stuck and there's seemingly nothing that they can do about their situation. Well, first of all, I hope people hearing this talk realize, oh, there's a lot I can do. I can work on myself, or work on this or that, or being a better person, or being more honest. So that's all stuff that you can do. And by the way, so again, going back to control and perspective, and I'm going to get to this third thing in a second. But I tell people, you talk about rabbit holes and everything else like that. It's so easy to just find yourself mired in just, there's so much bad stuff out there that you could easily, get depressed over and distressed over, anxious over. So part of the honesty is, I would say, a few things. One is to know when you're spending too much time in a certain state, or too much time chasing a certain dragon, or too much time hating on a certain group. So being honest with yourself, go, whoa, okay, I allowed myself that kind of, I don't know, whatever we call that, lapse, let's say, but I got to pull myself back, or I've got to see what it's doing to me. Or maybe I'm going on, I'm spending more time on social media, and I'm getting all riled up, and I'm getting all this energy and all. Yeah, but be honest, how much of it is positive? How much, do you walk away almost shaking and so on? So I think people have to be very careful while they're locked up, because there's so much access to so much information. I think it's something that people really have to do, is limit how much information you're taking in. And also making sure that if you ever do go down a rabbit hole, Google something that is opposite or contradictory or opposing whatever rabbit hole you went down, so that you can see maybe there's another side to it. Because one of the things that I've been given lots of links to, a lot of people are sending me these links, and I'm forgetting the doctor's name, but there's several doctors or other people who are promoting what some people would call a conspiracy theory, okay? And I don't like that term, because my catchphrase is, I go, sometimes there's, like, when I talk about things I know that are fact, I go, it's not a conspiracy theory. I say it's a conspiracy fact, right? A conspiracy doesn't mean that it's a lie. A conspiracy means two or more people are colluding to do something bad. So that happens all the time. So there are a bunch of conspiracy theories, and people like Alex Jones or David Icke, or Icke, I'm not, I-C-K, Icke, yeah. Okay, and others. And this doctor there's a doctor, there's a scientist, there's a whole bunch of people. They are presenting a lot of information that is pretty valid. Okay, these are things that have been proven, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's going on out there. But here's the thing that people have to realize. A few things to kind of help bring themselves down, okay? So when people send me these links and stuff, they go, what do you think about this? I go, well, I know for a fact that certain things that they're saying are true. Okay, so accept that these certain things are true, number one. But number two, the dots that people are connecting, that's where they start falling off. Okay, Alex Jones has revealed a lot of stuff that has proven to be true, but sometimes he spins in a certain way, or he brings in stuff that's not true, or he connects dots that may or may not be legitimate. And why would we think that this particular person has more insights into something than we do? They may have more knowledge, they may have more access to certain information, but why do we know? Why should we believe that they necessarily can connect those dots that no one else is connecting, for example? So what I tell people is, the second thing is, accept that certain things are true, but we don't know that the connectings are correct, the connections that are being made. And third, most importantly, this is the way that people can truly, and COVID, this is a kind of exception to what I'm about to say, because this is a new experience for us. But what I say is, no matter what conspiracies are going on in the background, no matter what evil doings or whatever else you think might be happening, the fact is, if they're there now, They were there before you were born. They were there before your parents were born, grandparents. Like, they've always been there. And in reality, for almost everybody, they don't, at least in Canada and the States, they don't affect us directly. Okay, they can have an effect, they can trail, they can do like later on, but because if people are saying, oh my God, there's danger around every corner, well, that danger was always there and it didn't hurt you. I'm not saying to people to be ignorant, get your knowledge, learn this stuff, but realize that this stuff has been happening before. It doesn't affect me. And if it does affect me, I mean, there's lots of stuff that affects us, right? And I think, again, we need to learn what can and cannot hurt us or help us or whatever. Don't be ignorant. But don't get distressed, overwhelmed, is what I'm saying.
Now, what about, though, the people who are actually so far in a rabbit hole that they would say, okay, the New World Order is hurting. The schooling I was put through was to traumatize me. I was vaccinated, you know, before I knew better. I've been poisoned. I'm, you know, people who are actually perceiving mind control around them and a government working against them. Both for people who are stuck in that, or specifically, and Grizz had asked me to ask this because just he'd been down enough rabbit holes that he's not caught up in any of them anymore. But he said, what would your advice be to someone who went down so many rabbit holes that they just don't believe anything anymore and just can't trust the government, any major corporation? So it's both, what for the people who are stuck in that world? And what about someone who's been through the ringer so many times that they just can't trust anything anymore? What would your advice be?
Well, so if someone came to me and they told me, like, let's go to the rabbit hole first. So the rabbit hole, some people stuck in the rabbit hole, they may have a serious personality issue or a mental health issue that prevents them from being able to see things more objectively. Okay. So some people that know nothing I say is going to help. They might just, they can't be helped just by my words. But I hope that they would be inspired to maybe step back and question and go, okay, where's the evidence? I see what I think is evidence, but I can also find just as many pieces of evidence that say that the world is flat. All right. So, you know, I hope they can gain some perspective. But for people who don't have that serious mental health issue, who maybe just got lost, so what do I say? So now to the second part, if someone came to me and told me I've been screwed by the system or the education system feels this way or whatever, I wouldn't deny it. I would go, yeah, I'm sorry that that's, you know, your experience, right? I would acknowledge it if that's how they're experiencing it. And then I would look at what they can actually, like, I would say that, again, it depends on the person's situation, okay? Because there are many people who've actually had injustices, and one about, you know, that I would say, and I've told them, I say, I understand why you don't trust anybody or anything, okay? Let's say somebody was taken by Child Protective Services, and they spent their first 15 or 18 years of life in various foster homes, group homes. They were raped, they were whatever. Why would they trust any system, okay? And it doesn't have to even be that extreme. I've got many patients who were bullied in childhood in school. The parents went to the principal or the teacher or whatever, and nobody did anything about it, and it only got worse. So to say, oh, no, you're wrong is a fallacy. I would acknowledge that this is what they went through. So I would say, okay, knowing that there's many systems, you know, or people that you can't trust, okay, my question always is, what are you going to do about it? And it's not a rhetorical question. It's, okay, let's take this into consideration. Let's accept this as fact, okay? But I'm also very mindful of language, okay? I wouldn't say you can't trust everybody. I wouldn't say every system is corrupt or this or that, because the fact is it's not true. All right, this might be problematic. So that's where I try to help them to at least contain it. That's where I was saying contain earlier. Where, you know, even if I said even if 95%, okay, of the systems or people that you encounter are maybe people you can't trust. I'm not saying they're going to hurt you, but maybe you can't trust them. I would say, what are you going to do to try to find the people who you can trust? Which you have to be very careful, because there might be a group of malicious people or malevolent people going, you can trust us. You have to be very careful, okay? But I'm thinking the worst case scenarios, and how do you even help them? Because if you can help someone who's so far down the hole, then someone who's much less so should have a better chance to kind of ground themselves and say, you know, again, if people say the school system is corrupt, I'll say, sure, I won't deny it in some school boards. Okay, can we find where a trustee or someone else has been stealing money, or there's a corrupt education system or whatever? We can find all these different things. I'd say fine, but I would say then again, what are you going to do with it? And if someone says, well, I'm going to homeschool, I'll say great then. Okay, fine, homeschool. You're taking control of that. But what I do is I get them focused on what they are doing. That's back to that control and containment part. Okay, because if they say, well, I'm homeschooling but it's still not enough, what about this? What I say, no. Because for people who say, what about, I always go back to, and people wonder why I do this. It's a paradoxical intervention. I say, you know what? I say, the fact is you can do everything perfectly. You can have your bunker set up. You could do everything to protect yourself against all the evils of the world. And you could have an Iron Man suit, and then you get hit by an asteroid. That's out of our hands. Okay, so I say, and then people get anxious over that. I go, but the point is, I want to help you kind of learn to let go of that illusion of I need to control everything. And that's what I say. I say, the fact is, it's a hopeless, it's an impossible endeavor to try to control every single thing, whether you have OCD, whether you have anxiety, whether you're paranoid, to try to control everything, it's impossible. So I say, when you realize just how little control you really have, it seems like an anxiety-provoking thought, but in reality, it's like, wait a second, I have no control over all these things, but the reality is, I'm still here. Okay?
Yeah, it's I forget who said it, but someone said the Western reaction to hearing everything's out of control is panic, everything's out of control. The Eastern reaction is relax, everything's out of control.
Exactly. And again, I'm not a normal Eastern type thinking person. Okay, mine would be like, gotta do this, but I learned to just go, no. And again, it's not about being ignorant. It's not about resigning yourself to your fate. It's about being realistic and focusing on the stuff that you can control. And that's very important. When we talked about perspective earlier, okay, and that's why I said to people, I'd say, okay, if you homeschool, focus on that. Okay, if you're worried about your children, then focus on raising them the best that you can, recognizing, of course, here's where the honesty is, that you don't know everything. You could be wrong about certain things. Encourage your children to be critical thinkers. Encourage them to challenge you and so on, except for curfew. You don't challenge curfew, but encourage them to, to do all these things, because the whole point is, and this is where we said earlier, talking about if people say, oh, this is all.
Oh, did I lose you? I'm not sure if you can still hear me. You seem to have frozen up.
If I can get us back.
Okay, yeah, you're back.
Sorry. Yeah, you're back?
Yeah.
Sorry, you are totally frozen. So I don't know where I got lost or cut off. I'm sorry. I think it was on my end. So
yeah, that reset my brain too. But okay, so we'll take it from here then. Like you said, the power of the way you frame things. So for people right now who might be framing this as a disaster, I'm stuck at home, and they're entirely focused, like caught up in all the worry involving things outside of their control. What advice would you have on how to reframe this as an opportunity for something else? And what can they do so that their focus is going towards something productive instead of digging them into a rabbit hole of neurosis?
Right. So as I was saying before I got cut off, we don't want to be ignorant. All right. That's what a lot of people who go down these rabbit holes are saying. No, I need to know everything. And so much of what you see is going to be not real information or not helpful. So if you've already gone down some things, if you've already seen some information, you have enough information. Okay. If you want to check the news occasionally or whatever sources you use, occasionally limit it to a very brief time just so you're up to date. But to go further down, you're not going to find anything. You're just going to find more stuff to confirm what you already believe, right? The confirmation bias. So put that aside and focus on what you can do. And so what can you do? So as we were saying earlier, so much of this stuff's out of your hands. Focus on what you can do. So everyone has a different, whatever their needs are, has it differently, but focus only on that and only on the stuff that you can actually do something about. And everyone, I mean, there's a million different things that people could do, but that's all that you should be focusing on, and saying whatever else is going on out there, okay, as long as it's not the zombie apocalypse, okay, if it's anything else, I know I have control over this domain, okay, whatever that happens to be. So I can't stress it enough. When you here, I'm just gonna give you a little, I'm gonna steal from Act Made Simple. I'm changing, it's funny because their analogy that they use, I like it, I use it differently, okay? So I'm gonna use a slightly different thing, okay? So imagine, I tell people, this will get to answer the question to help them visualize it. Imagine you're in a room, okay? It's a room, it's your bedroom, okay? And you turn off the light and you have a flashlight. You can choose to shine the flashlight at your bed, at the dresser, at the closet, whatever else, okay? Wherever you choose to shine the flashlight, that's where the focus is going to be, and that's what you're going to be able to see. The rest of the room still doesn't change. It's still the same. It's your choosing where you focus. And so right now with COVID, no matter what you say or do, it's not going to change everything else that's going on. Going down this rabbit hole is not going to change anything that's going on out there, right? So you have to choose. You've got to take that flashlight and say, I'm going to focus it on this. I know I want to focus over here, but I need to focus it over there. Yeah, I know there might be a boogeyman in the corner over there, but I know that, first of all, well, let me rephrase that. There's a boogeyman, or an imaginary thing. It's not a murderer in the corner, okay? Because if I take the flashlight away, if it's a
Oh shit, I lost you for a second there. Yeah, you're frozen again.
I tell them, story, Mercury.
Okay, great, you're back, no problem. So you were saying you turn the flashlight away from the boogeyman?
Yeah, from the boogeyman, not from the murderer, from the boogeyman, okay? Because realizing that, okay, even if I'm not looking, like, let's just work clear. When I say boogeyman, I mean something that's not real. It just seems scary, but it's not real, okay? Again, murderer, scary, real, but boogeyman. So, because even if I turn away and I'm looking at something else, sorry, if I look at something else, if I'm not focusing on this, it's still not going to affect me, okay? And most of the news, most of the stuff that people are hearing about, once again, will not directly affect me. What somebody should do, if they're worried about government, look at your most local government and see what they're doing as far as access to resources, what's the rules, whatever else. Okay, if you need to look at that, keep it as local as possible. Looking at geopolitical, machinations is not going to help you. Okay, it's going to overwhelm you. So I can't stress enough the need to focus on what you can control. Okay, and this brings me to what I was going to say earlier about this concept that I have. Okay, now there's a million different ways of framing it. All right, I'm going to say it my way. Again, I always tell people I don't take credit for things that aren't mine. So again, people can say I've heard it. I don't care how you heard it. It's a very similar concept and it's not uncommon. So what I call it is the practical versus the psychological. I tell people to look at the world in this way. Now I tell people, I'll explain it in a second. I say I'm a bit of a hypocrite because in most things I say everything's on a spectrum. Most things in life are a spectrum, right? There's not black or white, there's a lot in between. I say, however, there are some things that I say are binary thinking, kind of like practical versus psychological. So what I mean by that is this. If something is practical, if it's a practical problem or a practical reason for not doing something or for doing something, to me, practical means there's a few ways of looking at it. One is it's objective, it's concrete, it's real, it's external. Most importantly, if I have 100 normal people looking at it, high 90s will all agree, yep, we all understand this is what it is, or this is why you should do it, or we understand why you're not doing it, okay? Now, there's always a couple of outliers, we'll forget about that, but the vast, we're talking high 90s agree on what we're seeing here. That would be practical. So for example, if this is the example I always give, if I'm working for a company and I haven't got a raise for 5 years, and I think I want to ask my boss, it's a great job, great company, whatever, and I want to ask my boss for a raise. And I know for a fact that the last 3 people who were even better employees than I am, when they asked for a raise, they all got fired, right? And they're better employees than I am, same situation, and they all got fired. Then I know pretty much that if I ask for a raise, I'm going to get fired too. To me, if I like this job and I need it, that's a practical reason not to ask for a raise, okay? And everyone should agree, almost everybody. Psychological reason would be if I say, well, maybe they're going to say no, or maybe I don't deserve it, or okay, do I have the ability Do I have the competence? That's all psychological, because if you put someone else in that situation, maybe 10%, maybe 50% would agree with you, but a lot of people would think differently. So practical versus psychological. I always tell people, if it's a practical reason, if, for example, I'm going to get fired if I ask, then you step back and you look at it and go, okay, if that's the reality, either I keep my mouth shut and I learn to accept it, that I'm never going to get a raise, or I go, I don't want to live this way, and I'm going to leave. I'm not going to pretend that I'll magically get a raise if I'm not getting a raise. Okay, that's practical. You learn the reality and you learn to live within it. Everything is psychological. Then I always tell people, you have to ask, why am I thinking about this differently from others? Okay, and it's the same with going down rabbit holes. The fact is, is there a practical reason to get information? Sure, of course. And by the way, a lot of things are both a mixture of practical and psychological. Sometimes hard to tease apart. They're not always one or the other. They can be a bit of both. Okay, but a lot of people, what they think is practical is really psychological. They've convinced themselves there's nothing I can do. It's the way it is. But when we ask the right questions, they realize, there's more I could do. Okay, so getting information makes sense. There's a practical reason for it. Okay, if I'm, if I know all the water's tainted, it's good not to do that, right? But if I am seeking this information, or if I'm stressing myself out or whatever, and I can't give myself a solid that almost 100 people would agree with me that this makes sense, if I can't legitimately do that, then I got to question, why am I doing that? What benefit am I getting? And if I'm not really getting that much benefit, then I have an ability and a right to myself to choose a different path from whatever I'm doing. Okay, that's how I would frame it. If there's a practical, pragmatic benefit to what you're doing, objective benefit, all the power to you. Okay, and it's hard for people to know sometimes.
Yeah, and I'll just say from my own experience, I found early on my path of putting myself together, I was often drawn down rabbit hole conspiracies and to look at the New World Order and whatnot. And I found that was happened the most when it was early. You're at that point where you're still struggling to do everything. And subconsciously, I was looking for excuses to back off the self-work because it was too hard, and to focus instead on what was wrong in the outside world. So I do agree with Peterson when he says that sometimes you can become an activist because you've got major self-work to do and you don't want to. And the easiest way to redirect that emotion is to project it outwards that, no, I've got to fix the world. The further I got on my spiritual path and the more I put myself together psychologically, the less concerned I was about conspiracies anymore, even when I looked into them. And ultimately, I've gotten to the point where, I have a feeling there's not the one big conspiracy theory that anyone's right about, but I have a feeling there's tons of little conspiracies going on, different groups running into each other, and that the world's essentially out of control, so we can all relax. And also, I had a lot of visions of the end of the world. Like, I phenomenologically went through psychosis where I experienced the end of the world. And I've come to the point where I do feel like the archetype of apocalypse is very powerful right now. And I do feel like we're going to go through one. In the world will not be the same in the future that it was in the past. And I see an honest potential that it will be the kind of, we could also genuinely destroy ourselves. I don't know what kind of apocalypse I feel is coming, whether it's a new age because we can't stay where we are, or whether we're going to finally set off all the nukes. But ultimately, I've also become depolarized to that. If there is a new world order, if there is some sort of apocalypse coming, that's out of my control. And I found that ultimately, if you're living life the right way, if you're living your own path, you'll realize it doesn't matter if the world's going to end in 2 years. And questions like, well, do you still have kids? Do you still do your job? Do you still plant a garden? I think if you're living the right way, you still do. If this is the last 2 years and then we're going to destroy all this, I'll plant the best garden I can to be destroyed. And it's, if anything, more meaningful and precious if there's a limited amount left. So for anyone who's really worried about the end of the world in some way right now, I think the way to focus is just on your world and what's in your control. Now, if, for example, you're the kind of person to get involved in local government and you want to think about a whole community, then yeah, just focus on building a great community, whether they're going to blow it up or not. But if you're not that kind of person, just let the rest of the world do its thing. Nobody asked you to control everything. Or if you're religious, you know, Christ said, take the splinter out of your own eye first, and really just live the best life you can. And if you live the right life, you just follow your own path, and whenever your end comes, you'll be at peace with it, I feel.
Yeah, and you know, I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's very helpful, because then if people go again, once again, they can say, well, that's just someone who's going to be ignorant when the world, like, he's not going to be prepared. And look, some people, I know a few people who have taken up, you know, self-sustaining gardening and all this other stuff. All the power to you. Like that, great, do it. As you know, be prepared if that's going to help. You know, that's again because it's within your powers, within your control. What you said about, again, about focusing on yourself and all this other stuff, because it really boils down to that most people, sadly not everybody, but you know, almost everybody has this need to feel that they have some purpose, right? And in this big, huge world, it's hard to feel that there's a purpose. And you know, in the old days when we were like, we're talking thousands of years ago, the purpose was survival. Maybe the purpose taking care of your kid. That was it. And we didn't know there was a whole world out there. It was what was in front of us. Animals don't have.
Having kids used to seem like a public service. We almost look at it selfishly now to have kids, but it used to it was like a public service. The species had to survive, and we've lost that.
Right. And yeah, and the kids, a whole other thing which I help people, again, it's back to perspective as well. But you know, the point is that, you know, we're limited in what we can do. So finding the way that we feel that we are having some purpose. And I tell most people, it's funny because I say with kids, I go, for most people, that's going to be your legacy. You've left, you know, that's kids. You're not going to have a building named after you. You're not going to cure cancer. You're going to have kids. And I say, and this is, I know Jordan Peterson, I disagree with him on certain things, you know, philosophical, religious, whatever, we have disagreements. But when it comes to his approach to mental health, you know, and therapy, there's very little I disagree with. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So some of the things that I say, it's not like I'm not copying Peterson. I've been a psychologist for many, many years. Mm-hmm. You know, we just have similar mindsets, which is what kind of brought us together. So what the idea of, I say, if you've got kids, I say, you focus on making sure that these kids, you know, are a good legacy for you, like that they're good, productive, strong members of society. And I always tell them, I say, you're going to mess them up. That's a parent's job. We always mess up our kids, can't help it, right? But we try to mess them up as little as possible and try to make them as prepared for the world as possible, etc. And if you focus on that in a healthy way, not an obsessive way, not you're encroaching too much on their space, not trying to make them perfect little angels or competing with the neighbors, none of that.
If you take not living through them.
Not living through them for sure, right? Then you focus on that, and that is something under your control. And you go, well, what if my kids don't like me or whatever? Fine. Then you find ways to mend it. That will be your project. So I can't stress enough, as you say, whether it's doing government, a lot of people, they want to get into government, they can't. So, okay, I say, do something grassroots, you know, it can be very small, but it gives you something where you feel that you're making a change. And and I always tell people, you know, I mean, I have a platform, whether it was on TV or whether my lectures or whatever. So I reach more people than the average person. But if I didn't have that, I know that I would only be looking, and I always tell people, my tiny little corner of the universe, or my little circle of the universe. That's what I focus on, because that's what I know I have control over. And so when I try to be good to the people that I talk to, that I meet, or whatever else. And again, I know that by doing it, if people want to say that sounds too cosmic, hippy dippy, I know for a fact, doing it, my brain is saying, thank you, I'm actually being healthy. So, you know, again, with COVID, there's many opportunities people can find. And it's not to deny that for most people, this is really stressing them out in many different ways, whether it's financial, whether it's just social, whatever else it might be. There's lots of ways, and we're blessed with the technology we have today that gives us access to those ways. I was talking to a patient today who can't go to the gym. I said, you know, and she knew already, but I said, you know, there's a whole bunch of videos. You type in YouTube, do it yourself workout at home, no equipment. You'll find lots of ways to stay healthy and stuff like that. We have resources we never had before. The internet, as terrible as it is in some ways, it's the most amazing, you know, invention or creation that we've had. And so I hope people use it for the good. And yes, I could sit for 16 hours straight and watch all these, conspiracy videos, or I can find a way to, do something better, baking, whatever else. So life hacks, something. So once again, the key thing out of all of this, the key truly is taking the healthy perspective and saying whatever's out there that's beyond my control, here's the thing, I know for a fact, if I let myself think about it too much, I know it will distress me. I'll shine the flashlight over here. I know for a fact I'm going to, whatever, hurt myself. Why choose to do that? I can choose otherwise. And by the way, the whole thing about the apocalypse, I'll tell you right now, and this is, a lot of people started having this with the last election. Other people had it in the 80s with nuclear proliferation and stuff like that. I'll tell you, I've watched the movie The Road with Viggo Mortensen. Okay, it was a post-apocalyptic movie. I've watched a few of them. It's basically it's a post-apocalypse, and he's with his son, and they're trying to survive. Basically, really depressing movie, terrible movie. I mean, great movie, depressing. And I've watched a lot of these types of movies, and I do sometimes. Usually, when I'm about to sleep, all right, my mind starts going like, what would happen if, right? And I know there's nothing I could. First of all, I'm praying that that's not going to happen, but if it happens, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay. But where my mind could go like this, I know for a fact, it's not going to go where my mind's going, because that's my mind, right? It won't go exactly there. So why bother thinking about that? So I know that it's so easy to get so depressed, like literally I can depress myself if I think about it. It's just terrible, especially because I've got kids. If I didn't have kids, it would be much different. So I cut it off right there. I say there's no benefit to going there. And if I'm trying to sleep and that happens, I'll just get up. Like I'll get out of bed, I'll do some work, I'll do something. I'd rather lose a few hours of sleep than be stuck in bed frantically worrying myself. I'm turning off the flashlight, getting out, and I'm doing something healthy. And that's what people have to understand.
For people who have that phenomenon, you try to go to sleep, your mind gets caught up in whatever apocalyptic vision. A neat trick for a way to reframe that is to keep in mind what Seneca said about the importance of contemplating tragedy so you appreciate the current circumstance. So you can realize you're envisioning a horrible future, then choose to go a little further into that, really feel how horrible it is, then notice that that's an invention, and appreciate every single thing that exists now that you imagined being gone.
Right. And that's again, that's not enlightened thinking, because this is stuff that people can't do, right? It's enlightened down here that people can do. You're absolutely right.
It's a tool that works towards enlightenment if you combine it with other practices.
Right. Okay. But in the middle of the night, a lot of people don't have the wherewithal, because it's just like the circus music is going, it's just so overwhelming. So if they can try it, and if it's working, great. And if it doesn't work, you try it again. But again, for me, I don't need to do that, because I know certain tools, and for me to get this is me personally. I know that simply just turning off the flashlight, and just stopping and distracting myself, because I've already worked through all this other stuff, I can just do that, and it's a much easier intervention. I feel fine. I don't feel like bringing myself to this point, because to me it's too much effort. Okay, in that time. But if distracting myself was not working, if it was only keeping the wolves at bay for a few seconds, and then they would keep coming back, and then I would have to find a different way of doing it. And that's, again, embracing it or whatever. I have the ability to compartmentalize and say, okay, I know it's a possibility, I'm gonna put it over here, don't think about it. And it's not barking in the background, it's just it's over there, and I'm okay. But for a lot of people, they try to do that, and it keeps coming back. These thoughts or whatever haunt them, and that's why you have to embrace. And that's where we talked. I think it was in the other podcast where we talked about honesty. Maybe it was this one. I'm not sure, but the idea of being completely honest with yourself. So if these interventions aren't working, you have to be honest and go, it's not working. I've got to try something else. Okay, so.
And it's funny because that's exactly the way I was. And so I'm finding you a really enjoyable conversation partner, because we seem to agree on a lot of things, yet our emotional and personality wiring seems backwards in a lot of things, so that the exact thing that worked best for you is what doesn't work for me, and what works best for me doesn't work for you at all. I'm finding that's making for a very enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, and it's important for people to know that And anything, like I said, I'm a fan of what works. Okay, like anything that can work, and I'm a fan of saying if something doesn't work, find something else. Find something else. Like you look for, there's a solution, and certain people are born or are raised in certain ways that make things more difficult for them. If they're wired a certain way, and if people, if they look at me, oh, I'm a white hetero cis, blah blah blah, I go with all these labels, I've got all the advantages. Yeah, well, not everybody has only one kidney, and not everybody has a congenital heart defect that almost killed me. That they had to put me they had to put me under. Okay, I was dead for a few minutes on the table because of how bad the heart was. I died twice, once then, once many years ago. So not everyone has my childhood. I had better childhood than people living in different countries, but within my sphere of people, my childhood was pretty crappy in many ways, and it was good in other ways. So it's not like I had a charmed, perfect life. But and I don't complain about this stuff that didn't go right. I've learned, you learned, you talked about this, I think, in the other podcast, you learned to appreciate the kind of the burdens and the curses that you had, and you learned to use them. Okay. For me, I did that with certain stuff. And for others, I just said, there's nothing I can use with it. I just accept that it happened or whatever. Not going to keep me down because I have these other tools I was blessed with, or these other opportunities, or whatever else. Again, it's always choosing where to focus. And once again, in case someone tunes in later in the podcast, doesn't hear everything, it's not just some theoretical, hypothetical way of living life. This is a proven a proven intervention. If you change the way you think about things, as hard as it is, and it takes a lot of practice, you can't just snap your fingers, it takes a lot of effort, and you're living proof of this. If you put in the time and effort, you can find a better way to live. And the fact is, people who you can always find someone who's got it worse than you, and some of those people, they let it consume them, others somehow rose above. Right? And unless you're going to say they were blessed by something, well, if they were blessed, why would they have to go through all this crap? Like, the point is they did something that helped them get out of a bad situation, or cope with a terrible trait or whatever circumstance or whatever else. So there's, you can't cure everything, can't fix everything. I have some patients where I tell them, and I say to them, I'm not going to say anything. Like if I said anything, it would seem like a cliche. It would seem trite. It would seem like a platitude. It would be insulting. Okay. And so what I say to them is, here's an analogy I use. Just again, I just, in case someone says, well, you don't, what about this or what about that? With some of my patients, I say to them, I go, today, hearing you talk, I say, it's like you have a plastic bag over your head. Okay. And because that's what their life is like. And I said, I'm just helping you poke a few pinholes in it so you can breathe a bit, just a little bit. Because if I said anything else, it would just not ring true, and they would feel like you don't get me. There's nothing in my situation that you can say that would make me feel better. So I'm just acknowledging what they're going through. And sometimes that's all that you can do. And you hope that it gets better, or that you have an opportunity to make it better, or whatever else. But I never pretend that it's always like, that people can just think themselves into a better state. If you can make it that far, I mean, that, again, that's true enlightenment. And I know of only a few people who can do that. And, the way you're talking, it seems like I don't know where you are in the trajectory, but you've put so much effort in. Okay. So, it's possible. It really is possible. And I encourage people.
I was just going to say, for me, the only reason I'm at this level is because my condition's so severe. That's really what I had to learn to survive. So both on the suicidal end, it just, it's obvious how suicide is dangerous, but on the manic end as well. My second cycle, at the end of my second psychotic break, I hadn't been eating or sleeping like almost at all for months. I'd lost tons of weight. I was found by the police running around naked, bleeding where I'd cut myself accidentally. I was experiencing the end of the world. And if cops hadn't been driving by, if I had run off into the woods, I just would have died of exhaustion or exposure. So my condition's extreme, and it would have killed me. And it's like you said earlier, that your dad defined his as a curse and not a blessing. It's not that I define mine as just a blessing. It's a curse and a blessing. Bipolar has allowed me to go right into a very deep level of hell and right up to blissful encounters with God that are inexplicable. It's just, it has taken me all over the map of human experience. And yeah, to deal with it, this was the only way to survive. And I'm very fortunate. Like, even though I will describe a lot of this as having done it on my own in isolation, I still didn't do it on my own. I'm very fortunate that I'm in Canada. Like, I didn't even have to apply for disability. They moved me permanently onto it after my second break. I'm fortunate that my parents are willing to take care of me and help me. Like, they pick up my groceries when they get theirs, drop them off. My parents have supported me in numerous ways. So in that sense, I haven't done it on my own at all. I've been lucky enough to be supported. I've been given a place to live. I've been given my basic needs. And that has allowed me to spend over a decade doing this. Like, this is just what I've done for 10, like, and recently, it was just over a year ago, I started doing this channel. And after maybe 5 years of being a hermit, no, I guess a bit earlier, 3 years, I started doing a fair amount of helping people online. But still, the majority of my time was self-work. And when I'm helping other people, that's also just moving me along my path. Because, you know, I always found in college, when I helped my stupid friend prepare for an exam, those were always the ones I got a high 90 on.
Right. Yeah.
So helping others is a way for me to continue to hone my skills. But just if someone else has a severe condition, and in fact, the other night I was on my friend Grizz's D-Live program, and someone came across me for the first time. And at one point I left and they were talking to someone else. I was able to watch it after. And they started by saying how much they liked me, but then they said, and now that made them feel shitty about themselves and what they're doing with their life. So if anyone's watching this and you feel that way, keep in mind, I was blessed with the entire circumstance. Also, I'm very fortunate. My psychosis includes an angel that is actually enlightened when I speak to it. Now, and I don't know how to define this. I'm just aware that I don't know what metaphysical reality is. I have an atheist subpersonality. I have a believer subpersonality. And the truth of my angel is, I don't know what it is. If it's a psychotic delusion, then I have a psychotic delusion of an angel. If angels are real, then perhaps I have one. But I was blessed with a psychosis that has actually become informative, appears to predict the future sometimes, whereas I know someone else very well that their psychosis involved being possessed by the devil.
Right.
They got nothing beneficial from their psychotic trips. So those are things I did not earn, like both the support of my parents, the support of the government and situation, and I didn't earn the kind of psychosis I got. So I've worked hard with it, but nobody should compare themselves to me, even if they're bipolar. I'm too strange a case in every way.
Right. Okay. And no one should compare themselves to anybody. I mean, that's one of the,
Yeah.
you know, and at first they weren't sure when with social media and everything, the studies, they weren't sure. They, you know, they said that there was a correlation that the more that on average, people, the more time they spent on social media, the more depressed and anxious they were. And they weren't sure, was it because social media is making them more depressed and anxious, or is it more depressed and anxious people are spending more time on social media? Which is it? Well, after years and years of research and doing proper, you know, statistical modeling and everything, I think the data are pretty clear that, you know, that it's the social media that is leading a lot of people to feel depressed and distressed and anxious. And it's because they are comparing themselves to others. Because in the past, you could compare yourself to, you know, some actor or some celebrity. You go, okay, well, darn them, they're lucky, but, you know, like, I wish I could be like that. But they, and you can just kind of compartmentalize and say, well, they have this talent or they got lucky or whatever else. But when you see, it seems your own peers all doing something that you can't do or don't have and stuff like that, then it makes people, it's what we call upward social comparison, you know, as opposed to comparing themselves to people who don't have what they have. And, you know, and that's what, again, that's what you've kind of learned organically. That's how you learned gratitude, by, you know, by appreciating what you do have rather than being resentful and envious of what you don't have. And if you only look down and you never aspire up, then you're not going to get very far. But if you're looking way too up, right, and that's just, you know, overwhelming you and stuff like that, you're never going to get anywhere. And you're not going to appreciate the little things that you get because it's not as good as the great things up there. So again, all goes down to perspective. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to other people. I certainly don't. And you know, it doesn't do me benefit. The only time I compare myself to somebody else, okay, and it's not to compare myself, it's just to inspire myself. If I say, right, this person was able to do it, good for them. You know, why can't I? And maybe I will, maybe I won't, but you know, it's not impossible. And that's the only time and again, it's not a comparison, it's more of an inspiration. So yes, people shouldn't compare themselves to you and you feel bad or whatever else, but they shouldn't compare it to anyone else. And you know, and this is a fact. I always tell people, if someone comes to me and they have a horrible situation, I go, well, at least you're not as bad as this person. They're not going to be grateful for me saying that. They're just going to think I'm being unempathetic. So I'm not saying I think it's easy. What I'm saying is try your best. You know, it's an exercise. You just try your best not to get sucked into that. Why not me? Why, you know, why not me? Why me? Why them? Like, not doing that, because that's not going to help you. There's no practical benefit to it, right? It's, you know, it's accepting it and going, yep, that's just not that's not what it is. And looking at what I can do to change it, not to be like this person, but to make myself feel better than where I am now. Simple. Compare where you are. Compare yourself to yourself, not to others. And that's one of the, you know, and again, when you're stuck with COVID, you know, locked up and everything like that, it's much easier to fall into these traps, because you're spending more time on social media and stuff like that. If you find yourself spending more time in that, turn it off, do something else. Okay. But again, you always have that choice. The flashlights in your hand.
And I found that with social media as well. Like after my couple years of complete isolation with even no internet, when I got the internet for maybe a year or a year and a half, I was active on Facebook. And at first, I think it was good for me because it was just getting some social interaction. But eventually, I noticed it didn't feel good for me. And I just, on my own, suddenly just quit using it. And so I've got Facebook now, like, but I just use it like with you. It's just I use it for the messenger.
Right.
And I no longer scroll Facebook ever. And I found, yeah, I don't know exactly why, because I think I still wasn't. I'd learned the lesson not to compare myself to others, but there was something about the way interacting with that format affected my brain that I found unpleasant. Like observing my use of it and then quitting it. I don't know exactly what it was doing to me, but it was unpleasant.
Right. And again, that's back to the honesty of recognizing that, oh, I'm not, you know, there's more harm than good coming out of it for whatever reason. I mean, that's one good thing. When I got in the other podcast, I talked about how I was banned for life from Twitter. You know, I can still access it. I just can't do anything on it. So I'll check for news or other stuff. But, you know, I spent a lot of time on Twitter. I wasn't getting into troll fights, okay? But I was trying to do, and if people listen to the other podcast, I had a message that I was trying to deliver. I was trying to, you know, as a good psychologist, I was trying to promote certain piece of information, combat misinformation, et cetera, et cetera. And just the nature of it led to a lot of negative interactions. And I always tried to handle myself with decorum. But the fact is, it was exhausting and it took up so much of my time. Even on Facebook now, I post a whole bunch of stuff. It still takes up a lot of my time. You know, and if it wasn't for the stuff that I'm doing, because, you know, again, I do believe in what I'm doing. I do believe in trying to, you know, educate people, and not everyone's going to agree. I don't care. I've lost so many friends, and you know, a lot of people are upset with me for what I post and everything. And I'm not doing it to gain friends. I'm not doing it to gain, you know, social credit, and I'm not doing it to piss people off. I'm doing it saying, if I know something, I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to keep putting it out there, and I hope that more and more people will see it. And I keep delivering the same type of message. And I always tell people, with patients especially, when I'm trying to help them in certain contexts, I say the most successful people, they have their message and they keep delivering it. They don't vary off the course. They keep delivering it. I've got several different messages I keep, you know, doing. So it's taking some of my time. But it's not for me, it's not unpleasant. It's just I'm losing some time, versus with Twitter, I was losing time and it was unpleasant. I felt like I had to take hot showers afterwards, or sometimes just so, ugh, right? you know, and I sometimes got caught up in it, and I was aware of it, but other times I just got so lost in it. Even being aware of it, being mindful and being vigilant, I still got sucked into it because I had the right motives for doing it, but those right motives blinded me to other stuff that was going on.
I think just the interaction with the algorithm is tiring for our brains because it's programmed to give dopamine hits. And so to also tie this into something you'd said earlier about being careful how much you look into a rabbit hole or focus on a certain thing, be aware that the algorithm on YouTube feeds you more of what you want.
Right.
I learned a long time ago to be careful. If I'm going to look into something, like say I genuinely feel like looking into a rabbit hole for a while, or I know I need to exercise one of my asshole subpersonalities, so I want to watch some bitchy conflict or something. I open an incognito browser and go onto YouTube, because if I watch those videos and get them recommended,
Right.
it will bring out more of that in me. Whereas I know the kinds of subjects that I don't want to watch too much. So if I'm watching one of those, I don't use my profile. So my profile only recommends music, which I'm fine with all the music I want to, or like, you know, content like yours, lectures, because there's certain content that I'm happy to absorb as much of it as I can. You know, like there's no problem with me getting clickbait with John Vervaeke or Paul Vanderklay, but I don't want to be clickbaited into fear-based stuff. So
Right.
I always open an incognito browser, and if you do that, you can get the algorithm to work with your mental health. On its own, the algorithms will work against your mental health just for the sake of corporate profit.
Exactly. And one thing that when you were saying that, it got me thinking. Remember I said earlier about people, if you do downward social comparison, like instead of always looking up to people who have more than you, looking down can help you so you don't feel so terrible. The problem is what you're describing, that a lot of people, they're when they're looking down, this was the movie with Eric Bogosian, I think, I forget his name. I think it was an Oliver Stone movie. It might have been called Talk Radio. It was in the 1980s. It was about a real talk radio host before the Rush Limbaughs and everything. He was one of the first, one of the pioneers. And I think it really captured, can't remember when it was made. So I don't know if it was prescient or if it came after the fact, but it really, one of the things that he goes on one of these monologues, and it is true, where he was basically telling people, you listen to my program because essentially it makes you feel good about yourself, because there's so many people who are worse than often. And it wasn't in a healthy way. It's like, you scumbags, you whatever, okay? And that's what a lot of people do as well when they're looking, when it's downward social comparison. I tell people, you don't do it, if you're gonna do downward social comparison, it's purely for the sense of gratitude with thank goodness, right? This is what I have, or whatever, as opposed to beating up on those people, because kicking people who are a little beneath you, it feels good in the moment maybe, but it's cheap and it's not good for your soul. It's not good for your spirit. It's not good for, right? But that's what a lot of people end up doing, and they don't even recognize that that's why they're doing it. It's not only a distraction, but it makes them feel better about themselves because, well, I'm looking down on others. That's not healthy. So just wanted to throw that out there, that people lie to themselves, and no, I mean, and I the same way. I know I'll do sometimes. I'll go videos, just some really stupid videos, and I recognize what I'm doing. I'm kind of giving myself a break, like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I got to be mindful of time and stuff like that. I don't pretend it's something that's not. I'm not doing research. I'm just having a mental break right now, and but because I'm fully aware of it, I'm not going to fall victim to the stuff that it could do to me. The only victim I become is because I don't have an incognito browser. Then it's going to end up being recommended. So I just watch other stuff and try to flush it out. But right. But again, it's almost, we've been going for quite some time. I'm going to have to be checking. Yeah. It's been flying. I hope that as much as I'm babbling about certain stuff, I hope that people kind of get those main points. I've said them a few times, but I just want to stress it one last time, that nothing that you and I have talked about, none of this is based on some ideal, okay? It's based on, in your case, it's empirical. You did it, it worked for you, and it's helping you. For me, I've seen it work with other people, and I know the research behind it and whatever else. And by the way, if there was only research and I didn't see it happen, I wouldn't promote it, right? I've actually seen it happen in real life. So I'll say it one last time. Perspective, right? That you have control over. Not to lie to yourself. It's so important. We don't lie to ourselves. We don't rationalize, but we take a healthy, adaptive, realistic perspective, number one, and then it's containing and controlling stuff. That's the other one, okay? And if you keep those two things in mind and you always focus on those two things, that's always within your capability, certain things. And again, and even if there's a million things that are outside of your control, you have the ability to focus on what is in your control and to work on that and focus on that and improve on that. So
beautiful. Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. And so thank you so much for your time. I think these will be great to put up, but also I thoroughly enjoyed this. So hopefully we can do it again. And actually, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you and my partner sometime when he's available. Like he's studying Jungian psychology. He's just about to get his master's. So yeah, and so if you're ever kicked off other platforms as well and you have something you just want to get out there, feel free to stop by anytime. And yeah, and on that note, I just encourage everyone to check out Dr. Amitay's work. He hasn't put up anything in a while, but there are some great videos on his YouTube channel. And we'll have the links to everything he mentioned in the description.
Yeah, I'll give you all the links, and yeah, so thank you, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, and you and I will stay in touch on Facebook, and we will do this again.